As you can see, I am not in my usual office. My family and I are on the road this week, so I ask for your forgiveness here in advance for the poorer than usual audio and video quality. But all the same, I hope you'll enjoy the video. I am fully aware the general reception of the 4060 Ti has been anything but positive. With a price tag of $400 and only 8 gigabytes of VRAM at a time when many games are beginning to recommend 12 or even 16 gigabytes, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. But despite all of this, you're still here watching this. So obviously you're curious about how the 4060 Ti performs in VR. So let's take a look at it. First up is a game you guys have been asking me to benchmark for a while now. And now having tried it, I understand why. Blade & Sorcery is one of those games that allows you to explore your darker side, and is a lot of fun in the process. I've only just begun playing it, so I haven't gotten too far into what all you can do in this game, but the 4060 Ti provided a very good experience. Personally, I prefer higher resolution in VR to super high refresh rates and super high detail settings, but the 4060 Ti delivered everything in this game. As you can see, we had a solid 90 FPS at 4704 by 2384 with the game settings at what you're seeing on screen now. The one place I've encountered so far in this game where I saw performance take the biggest hit is in your little cottage when you look in the mirror. I'm guessing we have some ray trace reflections going on here because performance takes a huge dump here, and gameplay becomes a bit uncomfortable. Once you get away from the mirror, though, things are much better, and the only other time I saw the frame rate drop was a few times as I was fighting waves of enemies like right here. According to the graphs, we still have performance headroom available, but for some reason our frame rate is being cut in half. You can see the application is dropping frames like crazy, but since the compositor isn't dropping any, gameplay actually still felt smooth to me when this happened. Whether this is a side effect of the 4060 Ti only having 8 gigabytes of VRAM, I don't know for sure. To find that out, I'll have to do some more testing and dig a little deeper, but that's my first suspicion at this point. Into the Radius is another game I picked up recently at the request of several of you, and like Blade & Sorcery, I'm only just getting started on this game, so I don't know of any particular sections yet that tax the GPU more so than others, but for the bit I've played so far, these are the settings I used, and overall the game looked good, and as you can see on the performance graphs, the 4060 Ti had no problem maintaining a solid 90 FPS in this game. Our GPU in this video is the Asus Dual RTX 4060 Ti OC running Nvidia's 536.23 driver, and paired with it is the AMD Ryzen 7 5800X3D, 32GB of 3600MHz CL16 DDR4 RAM, and resizable bar was enabled. And all testing was done using an Oculus Quest 2 headset connected via a link cable. One of VR's most popular games is Beat Saber. It's not a particularly difficult game to run, and the 4060 Ti had no problem running this one at 4704 by 2384 at 120 Hz. Depending on the song you're playing, I saw more or less performance headroom remaining. For example, I Want to Be a Machine on Expert Plus, performance headroom hovered around 60%. However, in the newly remapped Imagine Dragons songs, which have a lot more stuff going on in the background, we only had between 10 and 20%. Not that that's a big deal or anything, though, because ultimately you're just looking for a smooth gameplay experience, and using the settings I did, the 4060 Ti delivered exactly that. Since it was primarily designed as a standalone game, Breachers is by far the easiest game to run that I tested. I set the render resolution in the Oculus PC app to 4704 by 2384 and the refresh rate to 120 Hz, and the 4060 Ti spit out a consistent 120 FPS and had tons of performance headroom still available. However, at 120 Hz, I encountered a lot of stuttering in this game, which you can see in these captures, and it was very off-putting. I first tried restarting my PC, but the game continued to stutter. I then restarted both my PC and my Quest 2, and it kept stuttering. I then tried lowering the refresh rate to 90 Hz, and that fixed it. I'm not sure what exactly is going on here. Maybe it's a driver or some other software issue, but the fact that the 4070 Ti with its 12 gigabytes of VRAM was able to run this game at 120 Hz without any problem has me thinking the stuttering could be due to the 4060 Ti only having 8 gigabytes of VRAM. Again, this is another thing that warrants some additional digging on my part. Pavlov was another game where I experienced stuttering at 120 Hz. Even though the performance graph showed we had plenty of performance headroom, while I was moving, you can see the game was dropping frames almost non-stop, which contributed to the stuttering. When I was standing still, the stuttering stopped and gameplay was smooth, but you can't really play Pavlov without moving, so like I did with Breachers, I turned the refresh rate down to 90 Hz, and that smoothed things out a lot. According to the performance metrics, the application was still regularly dropping frames, but gameplay felt much smoother at 90 Hz. And since it was running at 4704 by 2384 and high settings, the game looked great. Contractors has been my favorite VR shooter for a long time now, and unlike Breachers and Pavlov, I didn't have any stuttering issues in this one. In Contractors' parking lot map, I did have some instances where the frame rate dropped down for a bit, but it always came right back. And it really only happened in very particular locations on Contractors' built-in maps, where there's more complex lighting and shadow effects going on. Contractors also has a ton of mod maps, the majority of which are amazing recreations of classic maps from the best shooters of all time, and they're all much less hardware demanding. As you can see here, this old Call of Duty map was no challenge at all for the 4060 Ti, which helped gameplay feel fast and smooth. The 4060 Ti ran Red Matter 2 at 120 Hz at 4704 by 2384 with the settings you see on screen now, but again, I think the 8 gigabytes of VRAM was causing the game to stutter quite a bit. Like I've already said, I don't know for sure if that's what's causing the stuttering, but just like with previous games, turning the refresh rate down to 90 Hz made the experience a lot better. In most areas of the game, the performance headroom was between 40 and 50%, but in my stress test areas, where there's lots of lighting and reflections for the GPU to deal with, the settings I used pushed the 4060 Ti right to its limits, which is why these are the settings I settled on. Like most of the games I ran with the 4060 Ti at 120 Hz, The Walking Dead Saints and Sinners suffered from stuttering, even though the performance graph showed the GPU had plenty of horsepower to run the game at the settings I was using. So once again, I lowered the refresh rate to 90 Hz, which allowed me to increase the pixel density from 100% to 120%, making the game look even sharper. This game likes to cut the frame rate in half when the performance headroom drops below about 20%, so that's why I didn't push the pixel density up any higher than I did. I wanted to have some headroom there to try and keep the frame rate at 90 at all times, but for whatever reason, whenever you're fighting walkers, the performance headroom drops to the point where the frame rate gets cut in half. It doesn't negatively affect the experience at all in my opinion, but it is something I feel I should point out. After all the trouble I had running most every other game, I didn't even bother trying to run Half-Life Alyx at 120 Hz and just went straight to 90 Hz, and the 4060 Ti delivered a very nice experience in this game. I was able to set the render resolution to 4704 by 2384, and the in-game performance option, which is Alyx's graphics quality settings, to the high fidelity preset. Even though this game is now a little over 3 years old, it's still the best looking VR game out there, in my opinion. And gameplay-wise, it's almost perfect. The only thing I would change is adding the ability to sprint rather than having to jump teleport when you need to quickly run from danger. But yeah, the 4060 Ti offers an excellent experience in this game. Since I first started benchmarking graphics cards in VR, Assetto Corsa has been the one racing game I've tested. I'm not big into sim racing myself, but I know there are a lot of people, perhaps you're one of them, that are into sim racing, and according to you, what I should have been benchmarking is Assetto Corsa Competizione. So I went out and bought it, and here's how the 4060 Ti handled it. I like my graphics in VR to be as sharp and clear as possible. And I found with the Quest 2, setting the render resolution to 4704 by 2384 gets me the kind of clarity I'm looking for. Depending on the GPU and the game I'm testing, this means I need to either lower the refresh rate or lower the game's graphical settings, or a combination of both, to maintain our target frame rate. In Assetto Corsa Competizione, I was able to set the render resolution to 4704 by 2384 and the refresh rate to 90 Hz, but I had to set the in-game graphics quality to the VR low preset to keep the frame rate above 90 FPS. I'm sure I could tweak individual graphic settings to improve the visuals somewhat, but for the purpose of this video and to keep things simple, I like to just stick to using the presets. Of all the games I own and test with, Lone Echo 2 is the second most difficult to run behind Microsoft Flight Simulator. I first tried running it with the in-game graphics settings on high, but in order to maintain 72 Hz, which is the Quest 2's lowest supported refresh rate, I had to lower the render resolution to 3936 by 1984, which left the game looking more pixelated than I like in the headset. I then turned the settings down to medium, which allowed me to crank up the resolution to 4704 by 2384 again, and not only was the 4060 Ti able to maintain a consistent 72 FPS, but the game looked fantastic. At that resolution, the graphics looked sharp, and as you can see, even at medium detail settings, this game looks great. The last game in the lineup is Microsoft Flight Simulator. For those that regularly play this game in VR, you know that you don't need to maintain 90 or even 72 FPS to have a good experience. As long as the compositor isn't dropping frames, you can play this game as low as 30 FPS and still have a decent experience. For my testing, I always set the in-game settings to their lowest values except for render scaling, world scale, level terrain detail, and objects level of detail, which I set to 100, so you can easily compare performance between different GPUs I've tested. In this training flight over Sedona, Arizona using these settings, the 4060 Ti was able to spit out a pretty constant 72 FPS with the render resolution set to 3264 by 1648. Yes, this made the graphics look blockier than I like them, but I do this because as soon as you load up flights over areas like New York City that have lots of buildings to render, our performance headroom drops below 0% and the compositor cuts the frame rate in half. Looking at the performance headroom graph though, the 4060 Ti was sitting between -10 and -20% here, so we do have some headroom to improve visuals a little more if we wanted by increasing the resolution a little bit or raising some of the game's detail settings. While the 4060 Ti delivers great performance in VR, I mean 90 Hz 4704 by 2384 high graphical settings is nothing to scoff at. But if I'm interpreting the data correctly, which I believe I am, the GPU is capable of even more. Again, I'm not 100% sure the 8GB of VRAM is what is causing the stuttering I experienced at 120 Hz, but it makes complete sense to me. The higher you push the resolution, the graphical detail, and the frame rate, the more VRAM you need to store all that data. And I think the 4060 Ti is simply running out of space for everything when trying to output 120 frames per second, resulting in the application dropping frames and giving us choppy gameplay. If you'd like to see how other GPUs like the 4070 Ti, the 6700 XT, Intel's A770, and others that have more VRAM on them perform in VR, then check out this playlist right here. It'll arm you with what you need to know to make a more informed buying decision.
Subscribe!